The Chernobyl catastrophe was one of the most dangerous moments in the history of Europe, and possibly the entire world. As a result of the explosion, 192 tons of radioactive substances were released from the reactor, 3 tons of which spread outside of the plant itself, contaminating neighboring towns and villages with radiation, as well as carrying radioactive particles all over the globe. The radioactive cloud from the accident traveled over the European part of the USSR, as well as Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus, and even reached the USA and Japan 10 days later. According to the World Health Organization, after the accident, 600,000 people living within a radius of 30 kilometers were exposed to a high dose of radiation. This horrific event happened because of 2 main factors: the people who worked at the nuclear plant and the engineers who developed this type of reactor. On the night of April 26, 1986, a test of the cooling system that supplies the reactor with water was scheduled. During its operation, the reactor generates a massive amount of heat, and without cooling, the entire structure would simply melt down. In standard reactor operation, the reactor itself produces the energy for the pumps, but in case of malfunctions, its energy then is produced by a generator that takes about 1 minute to start up. According to the calculations of the Hydro Institute of the USSR, this should have been enough to resume the cooling of the reactor in time. But these calculations were only done on paper, so a decision was made to conduct a test to see if they were correct or not. At the time of the beginning of the test, the reactor had already been shut down for 8 hours, which caused a lot of xenon gas to accumulate within it, a phenomenon called xenon poisoning, which makes nuclear reactions much slower. But the gas burns up quickly when the reactor is running. In such a situation, regulations require the plant workers to shut down the reactor completely. But on that day, the workers did not follow this rule, as well as the other important ones, for fear of falling behind schedule and losing their jobs. The experiment has begun, and the reactor power was reduced from 50% to 25%, causing the imbalance of the automatic power regulator. The reactor engineers started manually balancing the reactor, but failed to do so, and the reactor power dropped to 1%. The shift supervisor was highly displeased with the result. The reactor operators were nervous as they hadn't prepared for the test. In addition, many points in the test manual were crossed out, which made them even more confused. The computer issues a report advising to shut down the reactor completely and wait 24 hours to get rid of the xenon poisoning. But the shift supervisor dismisses this advice and orders the experiment to continue. After a while, the operator was able to reach a power of 200 kilowatts, but the experiment should be run at 700 kilowatts. This fact also did not stop the shift supervisor from carrying on with the experiment. The reactor's power began to rise faster and faster, and even went above the scale. The Emergency Protection 5 button is urgently pressed to quickly shut down the reactor, but due to errors in the reactor design, it doesn't stop, but instead accelerates the nuclear reaction even more. The sound of 2 powerful explosions ring out. The reactor operators hear the distinct cracking of concrete structures. The reactor is completely destroyed. Radioactive graphite, which was contained inside the reactor a second ago, is now lying on the ground. Some of it also landed on the roof of the plant, but this should not be a problem, as according to all standards, the roof has to be made of non-combustible materials. But because of the fact that the executives tried to save money on it during the construction of the plant, the roof was covered with bitumen, which is perfectly flammable. Firefighters arrived at the scene of the accident and were told that it was just the roof that was burning. No radiation was involved. Of the first 28 heroes who put out the fire, only 2 survived. The rest died within 2 months due to radiation poisoning and its effects. While firefighters were sacrificing their lives, plant managers were covering up what was happening and trying to keep it quiet for as long as possible. This silence will cost the health of many people in the region. Evacuation and looting. 50,000 people living in Pripyat began evacuation only after a day and a half. Because of this seemingly small delay, many people received quite a large dose of radiation, due to which, in the future, many residents will get cancer. Many children will be born with serious defects, with some only living for a few days. One of the wives of the firefighters who stayed with her husband in the hospital for a long time gave birth to a child who had liver cirrhosis and a heart defect. The child died 4 hours later. When people left Pripyat, they were told that they would soon be able to return home. They just had to wait a little longer. The inhabitants left all their valuables at home expecting to come back, but most of them would never see their home ever again. During the evacuation, the police were checking the apartments for residents and radiation. Many of these policemen were stealing jewelry and other things that were not even that valuable. One of these policemen thought it would be a good idea to steal a couch from one of the abandoned houses. After a while, he asked to check this couch with a dosimeter, and as it turned out, it was indeed radioactive. He wanted to know because his daughter, who slept on it, got leukemia. Looting was not limited to just gold, jewelry, and furniture. At some point, people began moving metal out of the exclusion zone. Radioactive metal began to appear in different parts of the former Soviet Union. Metals contaminated with radioactive substances were of special value since they could contain rare and expensive elements. However, such metals posed a health risk to people involved in their theft and recycling. There was a lot of copper and silver in places like the unfinished reactor number 5, which was found on the equipment and the machinery of the reactor. Looters were burning out the copper on the lower levels of the building. This is a process where copper wires are set on fire to separate the metal from the rubber insulation. During this process, a lot of radioactive smoke was produced, which the looters inhaled. It's presumed that they all died of radiation poisoning or cancer. Various estimates suggest that the amount of metal stolen could be in the hundreds of kilograms or even tons. The exact figures remain unknown due to the illegal nature of such activities. There is no data on the exact number of people arrested for stealing metal from the exclusion zone, as such cases are rarely publicized and often remain at the level of local investigations. For example, in 2012, a group of people trying to smuggle 300 kilograms of metal were arrested. And a year before, Chernobyl NPP workers were arrested for stealing 24 tons of pipes. Medical studies. After the accident, large-scale medical studies on the effects of radiation on humans began. Cases of acute radiation damage were recorded, as well as long-term health effects on liquidators and residents. Many liquidators received high doses of radiation, resulting in acute radiation poisoning. Studies have helped to identify symptoms, stages, and treatments for this condition, as well as to develop protocols for medical care. And this information has also helped in treating victims of the Fukushima plant that exploded in 2011 in Japan. One of the important discoveries was the use of iodine preparations to reduce the uptake of radioactive iodine by the thyroid gland. This significantly reduced the risk of thyroid cancer in survivors. Studies on the effects of radiation on the environment and living organisms continue. Work is being done on strengthening the protective structures around a destroyed reactor to prevent possible leaks of radioactive substances. Moreover, bunkers for radioactive waste are being built on the territory of the zone, where it will be possible to store irradiated materials in complete safety, without the risk of spreading them outside the exclusion zone. The great danger is that in the case of forest fires, radioactive particles can be carried by the wind along with the smoke, but thanks to careful monitoring, fires are often extinguished in time. Despite the best efforts of the firefighters, there were still serious fires in the exclusion zone. One of the largest fires happened in 1992. It covered a large part of the forests around Chernobyl and raised concerns about the spread of radioactive particles accumulated in the soil and vegetation. Large fires also broke out in 2020, requiring the assistance of international firefighting forces to extinguish them. Bottom line. As the years have passed, the world has gradually realized the scale of the tragedy and its consequences. Despite all efforts to eliminate and control radioactive contamination in the exclusion zone, it remained dangerous. People who had once lived there had lost their homes and their previous lives forever. Many of them suffered from radiation-induced diseases, and their children were born with severe defects. The international community has increased measures to control radioactive waste and developed new technologies for the safe storage and disposal of hazardous materials. Special storage facilities capable of withstanding even the most severe natural disasters have been built to prevent the recurrence of such accidents. Chernobyl became a symbol of human error and short-sightedness, a reminder of the need for strict compliance with safety standards when working with nuclear power. In memory of the liquidators and victims of the accident, a memorial complex was built in the 2000s, a monument to the heroes who fought to save the world at the cost of their own lives. Despite the tragedy, scientists continued research in nuclear safety and radiation medicine. They found ways to minimize the effects of radiation exposure and developed new methods of treating those affected. Ultimately, the exclusion zone became not only a place of remembrance and grief, but also a unique sanctuary. Over the the years, nature began to recover. Forests slowly came back to life, and rare species of animals found refuge there. People have realized the importance of taking care of nature and being responsible for their actions. The Chernobyl disaster has forever remained in history as a lesson for the entirety of humankind, a reminder that technological progress requires responsibility and strict control. And although the wounds of this tragedy will long ache in the hearts of the people, the hope for a better future still lives in the memory of our generation and in the endeavor to make our world safer for future generations.